All right, so today we're going to be talking about Black history in the United States of America. Before we get started, I do want to let you know that we're going to be going in chronological order, which means we're going from when it started in the beginning, moving all the way up to today. So the first things that you guys are going to be seeing are things that happened over 400 years ago. And then as we get through the videos, you're going to see stuff that's happening like 50 years ago, and then some that even happened like 30 days ago. So, Black history is something that's been going on in the United States, and most of it has been really, really sad. So, if any point during this Nearpod you feel like you need to take a break, please do it. This stuff is sad, and this presentation was actually really hard for Miss Acton to make because it is so sad. But the only way that we can learn from it is if we start to do things better, and the only way we can do better is to learn from our mistakes. And we've made a lot of mistakes when it comes to the Black history in this country. So let's get started. All right, so when did it all start? So over 400 years ago, there were no Black people in the United States. And even before that, there were no white people in the United States. It was Native American people. But then white people moved to the United States. They started to build crops and plant fields, and they needed help. So they decided to start taking ships to Africa 400 years ago. This was in 1619. The first Black people were taken from their homes in Africa and shipped to America to become slaves. So ships traveled to the country of Africa, or the continent of Africa, and picked up slaves, picked up Black people, brought them back to America, and they became slaves for white people working on their land. So these people are all considered Black people, but they were considered Africans when they lived in Africa. Then, whenever the Americans, the white people, picked them up, took them to America, they became African Americans. So when you hear the term Black and African Americans, people that live in America, they're the same people. So sometimes you'll hear Miss Acton in this presentation say African Americans or Black people. They're the same thing when I'm talking during the presentation. So this is a map of our world. Our world is a globe, which looks like a ball, like a basketball. But when you lay it flat to make it like a map that you can write on, this is what it looks like. And we've got the continent of Africa right here, which is where Black people are originally from. So Black people started in Africa, Africans started in Africa, then people in the United States, which is where we live now, decided that they wanted people to help work in their fields, help plant their crops, bring them in, sell them, stuff like that. So they took ships and traveled to Africa, picked up Africans and brought them back to the United States where they became slaves and were treated very poorly. But that's not even the saddest part about it. So remember, this all happened 400 years ago, so quite a while back. Here's kind of a little closer view. And it doesn't look like this distance is really that big, but it took 2 to 3 months. That's almost 90 days, guys. Almost 90 days for these trips to happen. So these poor people that lived in Africa, they got put into these ships for 90 days, were crammed in these teeny tiny ships and traveled all the way back to the United States, where then they were sold to white people to work in their fields. And I'm just going to show you what the trip kind of looked like. So I have some pictures of some drawings. And again, this was 400 years ago when cameras didn't exist, but that doesn't mean people couldn't draw maps. So these are images of what slaves probably went through when they were on the ships. As you can see in this picture right here, they are packed tight. And the sad part about it is a lot of these ships, these Africans had to stay like this the entire time, laying flat on their backs. They had to sleep that way. They had to eat that way. They had to go to the bathroom that way. They wouldn't even let them get up and stretch their legs. And they were shackled. Their arms were shackled. Their legs were shackled. Couldn't move anywhere. And the ship stunk because, I mean, 90 days of you sitting like that, a lot of people unfortunately did die. And there's actually one picture that I want to zoom in again. So in this one, there's a picture of some Africans that are and some Black people that are in the ocean, and there's one that's getting thrown overboard. Don't really know exactly what's going on in this picture, but I'm going to say this one probably died, and the white people in charge of the ship probably threw it overboard. That way the body didn't start to, stink, because whenever things die, they do start to smell really bad. And there was also people that made it to the top of the ship that didn't want to live in that condition anymore, decided that they would jump into the ocean and see if they could survive that way. So it was so bad on these ships that some of the slaves jumped overboard just to get off the ship, even though they knew there was no land around and they would probably drown, or sharks live in the ocean. The ocean's not a place where a human belongs. A lot of times, if there were someone on the ship that was crammed in and maybe was possibly, going crazy, was, fighting them whenever they went down there to feed them because they were in these tight, crammed quarters. Sometimes, whenever they were acting silly and they didn't want to take care of them anymore, they would just throw them overboard because they didn't want to have to deal with them anymore because they were causing too much trouble. So you had to take your choice: either sit there and suffer, go into the bathroom on yourself and on the people around you. You also maybe could die and be thrown overboard, or you could just be thrown overboard because you're, being crazy and being someone they didn't want to take care of. So those are your options. So again, that trip coming from Africa, going to the United States, these Africans, these black people were taken from their home, which was Africa, taken to the United States. It was a 2 to 3 month trip, 90 days, where they were shackled and didn't get to move, and it was horrible conditions. And then they were sold when they got to the United States to slave owners.